I can't say it's one of my favorite books. Let me see if I can get this a little bit better here. It's always kind of nah, I really can't. Screw it. One of the books that I really enjoyed was Wizard's First Rule. I'm pretty sure it's Wizard's First Rule, where one of the characters is a truth seeker or describes himself as such. I forget, or he's a seeker. I know that, but for some reason, he seemed to kind of be like a truth seeker. Maybe one of you can correct me and let me know if that was in fact the case. But that always resonated with me because one of the things that's always been extraordinarily important to me since a very young age was the truth. What is actually true? And there is some kind of truism, you'll forgive me, that would you rather be right or would you rather be happy? And in many cases, I would rather be right. Not all the time, but I want to know what's actually true. I want to know what's actually real. Hold on for 1 second. This dog is being a real jerk. And so, what? You want to go outside? You think you're really going to find something great outside? Go ahead. You're going to be outside for a long time. Sorry for the view of the house, but you know how these live videos are. Very impromptu. Very impromptu. But yeah, I wanted. I've always been really, really not fascinated with the truth, but I really, what is true is extraordinarily important. As time went on, I realized that there are times when I'd like to be happy, not just right. But that's more of like a competition with other people, which is a completely different topic. I do believe that there are some things that are just objectively true. Ferreting these things out is not always easy, but I believe that there are some things that are like universally true, and a lot of this is like discoverable by the scientific method. And one of the things about the scientific method is, and the more we learn, sometimes these things change, and we're seeing some very interesting things happening in physics right now. So as we continue to not hold on to our darlings, but instead seek what's actually really true, if we're able to risk our preconceived notions, if we're able to accept what the evidence is actually telling us and what new information is actually telling us, then we can make fantastic discoveries. What the hell does this have to do with most of what I talk about? I think because of that, in my journey in life, and you'll have your own journey in life, I suppose, right? You're not going to have mine. There's been various times when I've gotten stuck on areas that I wanted to be true, and because of that, I lived in that delusion. I wouldn't allow myself to look at different evidence, sometimes because it was too painful, sometimes it was because that it would interfere too much and cause too much cognitive dissonance, if you will, with what I thought was true or what I dogmatically believed was true for whatever reason it might have been. And those times, looking back on them, were the periods of the least growth or least authenticity in my life, because I was essentially lying willingly in one way, shape, or form. And because of that, my growth as a human being was stunted, and my ability to respond and act appropriately with reality was hamstrung because I wasn't acting on what was actually true. I was acting on what I wanted to be true. You ever have that experience? And then you look back and say, well, how could I have been such an idiot? What the hell was that about? In terms of looking at life now, the things I've realized, the things that I thought were important, that I took for granted as being absolutely true because other people told them to me, because society told them to me, because everybody else was doing that, because it made sense based upon one of the biggest tricks you can fall into is the rationalization trick. There's a great scene, for lack of a better word, in the Foundation trilogy, in the very beginning of the Foundation trilogy, where there are two individuals talking about looking for the origin of the human race, because by this time they have no idea that Sol or Earth is the birthplace of the human race. The Foundation is that old. People just have forgotten where the heck did we come from in the first place. And there was one fellow that was wanting to go to the various places and doing archaeological digs, and the other guy was like, "Whatever for? You just take the basic facts as you see them, and then you calculate which one must be correct." That's a huge trap to fall into, and we can do that all the time, and ignore the evidence to our detriment. Right now, I'm drinking Fresca. I really like this. I haven't had this in a very long time, and you're going to laugh at me, and Susan's going to laugh at me when she finds out that I bought some Fresca. But screw it, nice and grapefruity, and I like that every once in a while. As I've been more fearless and more courageous in examining reality and examining the things that have made me happy and the things that have made me less happy, the more I've discovered, say, my own true self. And for each one of us, that's going to be a different journey, and you're going to discover a different person. I hope you're not me. But I'm not the kind of person that would say, well, we're here for a reason, and that's just my particular belief system. I'm not the sort of person that would say that everybody has a specific destiny or fate or calling, and if that's your, that's your belief, that's fine, But I believe that at some point, we discover, our real self. To thine own self be true. Know thyself is one of the most important things, as my friend Anthony would say. If you start to know yourself, if you start to know what you really like, what you dislike, what your own biases and preferences are, to use some of the terms we've used in role-playing games every once in a while, when you just start to discover, what gives you joy in life and what things that in life don't give you joy, it's much easier to become authentic, to become your authentic self. Because so often, like everybody, to a certain extent, we squeeze ourselves into these little boxes and we try to conform to society. I can hear, forget the name of the band. Was it with DRI? I Don't Need Society. Exposing my songs of my youth. We conform into what people think we ought to be doing. And this comes from our parents, this comes from teachers, this comes from our peers. And it continues to come from all the messages we get. And the messages are still being pumped into us now from, you don't have to look very far to find all of the messages that young women are getting about like how they should look, or young men or old men, how I should look. My feed is full of these guys in their 50s that are buff, and how I learned to, and yes, this is my second day back at the gym. So I'm feeling good about that. But we're constantly getting all these messages about what we should value, not what we should look like, what we should watch, what we should find entertaining and not entertaining, what we should believe. Very often there's a correct think that we're given from, the people we hang out with. I'm fiercely independent politically, and I'm, issue by issue kind of person. I can say that right now, certain things are absolutely insane in the United States, but I don't let any group of people tell me what to think. It's very easy to fall into that trap and just believe the entire party line, whatever it is. And that could be within politics, that could be within some part of, what's the word I'm looking for? It could be about role-playing games. I'm a member of this camp or of that camp. And so what do the OSR people believe? Or what do these people believe? Nonsense. And critical thinking is a stupidly important skill. That was kind of a funny way to say it. It's incredibly important to be a critical thinker. Because without critical thinking, we're not really looking after the truth. We're just regurgitating what somebody else said. And we're not examining things for ourselves. And no, I don't mean examining things by a bunch of stuff you can find out on the internet that may or may not have any credible sources behind them. I mean some real, honest to goodness research and, thought experiments and, conversations with other people and hearing the other side and, as much evidence and stuff as you can get to make your own decisions and, to have your own authentic beliefs and your own authentic values rather than values that you're just kind of like, okay, well, that sounds about right. or at least that seems to come with a package. Whatever people you kind of resonate with believe, and that's not for me. It's a very easy trap to fall into. But for me, there's always that alarm bell going off in my head when I'm starting to believe something or just, regurgitate the same thing that somebody else has said. I'm like, well, wait a minute. Have I really examined that? Have I really thought about that? Have I really measured it up against my own experiences or the evidence, if you will? And it depends. There are things that are scientific that are very evidence-based. There are other things about what's true for me and what's true for you that are less based upon the scientific method, kind of. We can still look at and find out what we really value. And I feel like I'm going around and around. Maybe I am. But it's really important to think, to examine for yourself, what do I actually really like? What do I actually really value? What do I really want to be doing with my life? When I'm spending my time off, how do I really want to be spending it? Am I spending it a certain way because I'm trying to make my family happy, or my partner happy, or my kids happy, or I'm doing things because of obligation, or I'm mowing the lawn because the neighbors will be, mad at me if I don't mow the lawn, or all that dumb shit, if you'll excuse me, as opposed to what do I really enjoy? When we're kids, we don't have to think about that stuff. We just do it. We kind of know and figure out what we enjoy. And as adults, that gets squashed out of us. And we have all these other voices in our head. We have all these other concerns. And, some of the best pieces of advice I've gotten is to, try to act more like you were a kid. Not being childish, but, following your heart, if you will. These things are important to me. Make more sense. It's funny, as I've been talking about my own situations lately and looking at bigger pictures of what's going on in locally and things that are political and what have you. It's funny, somebody mentioned, or I heard somebody mention today that, you shouldn't just be talking about the problem, you should be talking about ways to solve the problem. Now, there's things you can do individually, things you can do locally, whatever it happens to be, but you can't solve the problem as a whole. Why not? Well, one, things like political science there is no answer. But two, when you're solving the problem, if you decide you've solved the problem as a whole, what you've decided is what other people are going to do. Who the hell made you emperor? Who made me emperor? Who made that other guy emperor? That's the big problem. The big questions of political science. What are the rules? And says who? Really simple stuff, but then it ain't so simple. Yeah, what else was I going to talk about that was, I thought was really, really important at this exact moment? I don't know. It's important, I found, to trust my gut. I don't know about you, but, very often my intuition has a better handle on things than my intellect does. And very often, this is something you have to check, though. You can't just, go completely with gut level feelings, because very often there are other things that are knee-jerk reactions that you or I may have based upon fear and past experiences that can lead us into trouble. It's always helps to make decisions rationally, have I over E, if you will. That said, very often my gut has been relatively right. If I start to get a feeling like there's something not right with this, what I really wanted to do tonight, but Susan had to go pick up her kid accidentally, there was a miscommunication. I'd really would have wanted to sit down with her and talk about our relationship, because it's a great relationship. But one of the things that we both did in the past, mistakes we made in the past, was we just plain old ignored red flags. You ever ignore a red flag in a relationship or a job? And you think to yourself, you know what? I think it's glaring. This is a problem, but you know what? I think I can deal with this. This will probably be all right. I probably can. And you find yourself 5 or 10 years later or 2 years later or whatever it happens to be thinking, you know what? I don't think I can ignore this anymore. It's a big freaking problem. And that was one of the things we did with each other. There have been no red flags. There have been moments where we've absolutely bumped up against each other's wounding and triggers, to use psychological terms. And where we, a trigger is basically like if you find yourself emotionally reacting far in excess of the situation, probably a trigger. It's probably hitting some kind of nerve and some old wounding and all that kind of junk. Being able to talk to each other about that and notice when that's happening and being compassionate with each other and having some pretty difficult conversations regarding that. Because, it's tough to be rational once those things happen. If you get that amygdala response, you're using the reptile brain at that point. The prefrontal cortex, it ain't in the conversation. It's out of there. Or if it tries, it's not getting very far. Having those kind of conversations, getting at, once again, the truth, what's really happening, not our distorted perception of what's happening. Because very often in life, in a lot of areas, not just personal relationships, but in jobs, in situations, at a lot of stuff. These things start happening where we're reacting without our thinking part of our brain. Certainly in a lot of marketing hits that, where you go ahead and buy something without even really thinking about it because it hit some other trigger. And just think of all that conditioning that we have to be consumers. Listen, I'm not knocking capitalism. I'm not knocking consumerism to a certain degree. Heck, I like buying stuff. But we've gotten to such stimulus response where we see something and we instantly have to have it and we want to buy it. And look at all the bases on my wall. But they're very cool bases, by the way. But marketing is so powerful in that regard. It's funny, same old G and I were talking a little bit today about various things and about, the economy and whatnot. But interesting thing is he's got a bunch of students that are younger than both of us. And he was mentioning the idea that their attention span is so low because they've been so conditioned to these dopamine hits from, no, I haven't ended it yet. The dopamine hits are so frequent. And you look at something like TikTok and everybody else trying to imitate TikTok with Reels on Facebook and YouTube Shorts, and I forget who else is trying to jump on that bandwagon. But things are just bam, 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 bam happening, and it's funny. One of the things I've noticed diving into YouTube more in terms of like taking it more seriously as a full-time pursuit rather than just doing it as a hobby, is you see various bits of advice about how to, have successful videos, but also you watch a bunch of videos. And you notice different things, like in videos that I particularly like, there is no B-roll for the most part. And the B-roll is all that other imagery that happens. Besides this is the A-roll, my freaking talking head. And then the B-roll is as I'm talking about, like these kids that same old G's teaching. All of a sudden, it'll flip to a classroom with a bunch of kids like looking on their phones. That's kind of B-roll stuff. Or if I'm talking about my dogs, and there'd be dogs. It would switch to a picture of the dogs. That stuff drives me crazy. I would rather watch the stupid talking head. And of course, if there's charts or graphs or things that will help illustrate a concept better, I'm all for that. Not as ancient as me. Thanks a lot, Drew. Thanks a lot, Drew and Fuzz. But the flash in a video, that instantly messes with my retention. At some point, I want to turn the video off because it starts to annoy me. However, I haven't been conditioned the way that younger people have. And neuroplasticity is a real thing, and the way that the brain develops and continues to develop, especially in adolescence and young adulthood, we're really not finished cooking until we're about 30 in terms of our brains. And yes, we can make some changes then too, as well. But a lot of neurons are dying, and a lot of because we start with a bunch of them die, and then we get that structure of the way the brain works, and a lot of synapses get created, and they're the brains of people that have been exposed to more of that, really fast, change in at least visual stimuli. And some of all the audio stimuli that happen can be terribly distracting to an old fuddy-duddy like me. But it's it seems to be that for people that have been conditioned that way, it's better at holding their attention. And at the end of the day, YouTube and various forms of social media are all about your holding your attention. YouTube wants you to be on the platform as long as possible. So when you're done watching this video of mine, you're supposed to, you know, watch another one. Yes, ADHD can have you scrolling through those shorts. Definitely, it really can. Or reels, and I found myself in that thing where I'm just like, oh man, But they're also shorts are they're very surface level. You can't get into any kind of depth like you can in a long form video or a long form podcast or in reading a blog, that sort of stuff. But it's interesting. It's really quite fascinating to see. It's not like one is better than the other. It's like this is how our brains have developed based upon our different experiences growing up. That was one of the interesting things was wanted to mention when I was talking about being Gen X is during, the time that we grew up. My friends and I were all watching, all the cartoons in the 70s. And we all watched the same TV shows. We also watched the same TV shows because there were probably like 5 channels on. I was watching this guy, Dan Coe. You can find him on YouTube. Interesting guy. But he was talking about, he's younger. I think he's 27, 28 years old. And he was talking about like when he was a teenager, it was so much different because there were only 300 channels. And I'm like dying laughing. Because dude, when we finally got cable, there were 24, I think. Maybe 36. And not all of them worked. On this little device that had a wire that attached to the TV, and it had a 3-position switch, and I think there was 12 buttons, on each side, each row, or you get 36. I can do multiplication despite the video I made today. But you were the remote, yeah. We used to have to sometimes, the remote for most of us didn't have a remote. Most of the TVs didn't have a remote. A lot of our TVs were black and white. The TV we watched Saturday Night Live on in my dad's bedroom was this little black and white TV about this big. It was probably actually about this big. That was it. And we were glad to have it. But the thing is, there were like 5 channels, maybe 6 that we could get reliably. That meant that all of us watched the same stuff. There wasn't just that much stuff on TV, at least not in the United States. So we watched the same shows. We all had the same experience growing up. There wasn't the proliferation of music that there is today. You look at Spotify and you can have access to stuff all day long and, never run out of new and interesting stuff to check out. But back in my day, excuse me if I might have to burp, back in my day, you were limited to the radio, what you could buy in a record store, and sometimes we bought tapes, and that was a lot of what was available in most music stores, unless you went to a really big one, was dependent upon what was being played on the radio and what was popular or what was, being caused to be popular. So even the music that we were listening to was there was a lot more commonality. We all had this pretty much the same experience in terms of the media that we could consume. Yeah, the national anthem was played at about midnight. I forget, on TV. I'll tell you one thing, horrible thing that happened around 1986. And I know it happened around 1986 because I started working for the state. I started working some third shifts, and I was all excited to at least be able to watch some good TV. Because if you remember, back in the day, some of the channels had a national anthem that played, and then the bars would go across the channel. And you can see an example of that in the Close Encounters of the Third Kind movie. And if you've never seen anything like that, that'll give you an example of what that happened all the time in a lot of the major shows. Once again, I have to let the stupid dogs back in. All right? So, the other thing that happened, though, is we had some channels which did not shut off. And a lot of these channels had excellent late-night TV. They had these crazy B-movies like The Mole People. I remember watching that, and we'd watch these marathons of The Outer Limits or of just really crazy stuff, And, stuff that you now would have to watch, like a Mystery Science Theater, to get. This was like the normal fare on TV. However, what happened around 1986? The flying lure. The infomercial became a thing on late night TV, and it killed it. It was terrible. It was terrible. But the thing is, we all had that same experience as well. I missed exactly the entirety of the comment by Drew. Like, I guess I can look in the chat. But let's see. Can I see the chat? Can I see the chat? Live chat. Chat viewing options. Live chat. Okay. But it was one of those things where we all had the same experience. But like Drew and Fred said, the more channels had more variety, which was, it was cool. It was interesting. That was great. I'm not saying that our experience was better having fewer channels. I'm saying it was different. And so it's interesting. It's really fascinating to see how the perspective that different generations have on the world, and the perspective and some of the truths that they hold, their attention span, what works in a marketing sense, what works, and even like some values. In some ways, some of these are shaped by the accessibility to media and how that media was presented to us, which was fascinating. You watch some of those movies from the 70s, and they were slow, like nothing was happening. Like, I think if a lot of young people watch some of those movies, today, they would be bored out of their mind, because very often you go to I don't see a lot of movies now, not because I don't like them. Let's go through phases with seeing movies in the theater. But once again, that has that really fast scene change, and which can be compelling. I don't dislike it as much in the movies. But it's funny how that's almost a requirement now to hold the attention of people that have a different experience. Yeah, I wasn't sure what the experience was like, say, in Europe at that same time. I was in an area which did not get cable for a while, so a lot of surrounding areas got cable before we did, and it was very interesting also when HBO. And I think it was the very first one that came out. And so later on, we got things like the Movie Channel. When those came out, they had a few movies on repeat. They did not have a lot. It was very much like early MTV. Early MTV, like one of the neat things about the '80s, being in the '80s generation, or when MTV came out, was that like all of those videos, like Haircut 100, Love Plus One, Pretty in Pink by the Psychedelic Furs. Ant Music, Adam Ant. We can start to name all these videos that we all saw because they were on repeat, because there weren't that many of them for a long time until people got the idea, hey, we should make videos too. And then it was, there were more and more of them. Where was I going with this? But okay, so when HBO came out, it was that very similar thing that happened. They just didn't have access to that many movies. So when I tell you I watched Animal House 100 times in 48 hours, my brother and I could recite that entire movie from front to back because it was one of the only movies it was on. And let's see, The Warriors. It's this cult classic now, but it was a favorite because we saw it 30 million times. Think, oh gosh, what else? Blue Lagoon. I think Pretty in Pink was on. No, something. Whatever the hell it was. Pretty Baby. There you go. Brooke Shields. There are all these movies that were just on all the time. So, and yeah, you get VHS, you watch it. They had a Warriors cast meet and greet, which I was not able to go to, at a location in Middletown where a bunch of the cast actually showed up. The place that they went to is defunct now. But can you imagine that? Yeah, and so there were VHS tapes as well, like Drew said, that we could watch, hundreds of times. But it's different now, and because it's different, the perspective of the younger people And it's funny to call them younger people. Some of them are like in their, they're in their 30s and what have you. It's just different. It's just different. I look at like my oldest daughter is going to be 32. My youngest is going to be 30 this year. They're the first generation that probably will never, so Piper's being a little fresh, never lose touch with their friends from grade school if they don't want to, because there's so many different platforms that they can keep in touch on, even if it's just like a, hey, how are you doing, or seeing what the other person is doing. Yeah, come out and play the Warriors RPG. If you want to write, we should make a Warriors RPG. That'd be fantastic. I just thought the Baseball Furies were so cool, And shove that bat up your ass and turn you into a popsicle. The dogs are now excited about something that's not really there outside. They'll probably start barking at their reflections. But, it's interesting that they will be this generation that never has to lose touch with their friends or classmates. Whereas, when Facebook became a thing, and I think I probably joined it like 2008 or something like that, I slowly but surely started to find old classmates and people that I knew, peers that I knew from clubs or groups from quite some time. I haven't gotten in touch with all of them, which is fine. Most of them were just jerks anyway, but it's kind of remarkable now. I just kind of let people from my high school on my page because who cares? And and just silence the ones that you find annoying. And, it's kind of funny, but that's different. But the perspective of somebody that's having this experience is going to be different. Is the truth, the big giant truth, going to be any different? No. But their truth, their experience can be different. Yeah. Is that going to affect how they live authentically compared to an older person? I don't know. I think most people just still do not live authentically. Most people are still living lives for other people. I know that's something I struggle with to this day. When I realize that there are various things that I'm doing because they were expectations that were placed on me or that I thought were placed on me. So that's one of those things that's, it's that moment you have. And I should talk about this in a video where I actually have a cogent outline. There's that moment where you have this transcendent thought, or you have this, it's like an epiphany. And when you realize that so much of what you were taught, so much of what you took for granted, so much of what you assumed was actually true, is completely false. It's not actually based on anything that's real. Is really kind of scary and liberating at the same time when you're forced to completely reevaluate your perspectives on life and therefore upon yourself, what your real identity is. Because very often our identities are so tied up with our beliefs about the world. I've gone through several different iterations of Ivan and what his beliefs were. And, we can either retreat back into the darkness because it's too scary or, because it threatens our old identity so much. Or we can go boldly and say, okay, well, what is actually really true? What do I believe is actually true now? It's not quite as, well, maybe it is. There's that Newton described the world perfectly. And Newtonian physics is still used to this day to do most stuff because it works. However, there were slight differences about what was really true. And when you have the Einsteins and the Bohrs and you have the general relativity and the special relativity, if we didn't take relativity into account, our GPS system wouldn't work. Because it would place us way too far off, because time, the clocks on the satellites ticks at a different rate because the gravity of the Earth actually affects the way time passes. And the further it's the inverse square law holds true. So the farther you are away from the center of the Earth, your clocks tick differently. If we didn't take that into account and program that into those satellites, it wouldn't work. That's not spooky action at a distance. But spooky action at a distance, those entangled particles, that's really weird stuff, But, so we've had that moment where we discovered, hey, you know what? Physics is a little bit different. And so for certain things, for certain calculations, for certain things that we do, we require that different level of understanding. And now things are being challenged again, and that's great. That's great. That's how science works. We get to have a similar experience in our own lives, except sometimes, we need to throw a whole bunch of stuff out. I talked a little bit about that today and probably ruffled some feathers talking about this idea that, things like arithmetic, which is different than mathematics, things like arithmetic and learning grammar, like, learning like, what's an adjective, what's a pronoun, what's, all these things. And, various rote memorization is probably not really that necessary to teach anymore. Not because it's not relevant, but it's because those functions can be, time dilation, those functions can be handled by other things now. Should we have an understanding of them? Sure. But do we need to drill these things and memorize them? No. One, because we can do all the arithmetic we want to on our phones or whatever. And if we're really doing something very, very important, you better check it with a calculator. And, human beings are innately have a language instinct and will formulate grammar just fine. We don't need to know what it is to use it. We're not thinking about it. Most people don't understand the deep structure of language, yet they speak fine. But there's other things we could be teaching. There is that great Heinlein quote, which I have on my refrigerator in my house, not in Susan's house, where it says a human being ought to be able to do all these things, butcher a hog and plan an invasion and take orders and give orders and, fight gallantly and die bravely and, program a computer, all these kind of things. And specialization is for insects, which is true. However, like I mentioned in this other video, like most of us don't have those skills anymore. Why? Because they're not necessary in the society that we have. There's only so much that our heads can hold. Do I think being a generalist is very important? Absolutely. But there are other skills now that we can be a generalist at. It seems to be more and more manifest that, the skills that people are going to need to get by in the coming years, there's going to be a bunch of them. If you're too specialized, you're in too much danger of just being completely wiped out if your job is made irrelevant or your function is made irrelevant. And things are progressing incredibly fast now, incredibly quickly. But there's a whole bunch of the skills that we used to need to know that we no longer do. We don't need to know how to grow our own food. I Will Die. Glory Road. Oh, man, one of my favorite books of all times. I hope HBO does not ruin it because I love that book, fractions. Yeah, people don't understand fractions. But the thing is, here's the thing. As maddening as that is, do they really need to? In most cases? And I'm not being a jerk when I say that. Very often division, a lot of people find hard anyway. But, there's various things, that about how to live and how to survive that should society go to hell, we have a war or something like that, a big war, or the infrastructure, Welcome to the party. Yes, we're all complaining about the youth. There are only some people are going to be able to survive, that are going to have those real basic skills, the peasant skills. And I don't mean that in a derogatory manner. The people that know how to butcher a hog, know how to hunt for their own food, grow their own food, all that kind of stuff. Barring this complete collapse of society, in which case I hope Harry Seldon gives us a lot of warning, and we can get the hell out of Dodge and start writing the encyclopedia, if you catch that reference. Barring that, there are so many other skills that we just assumed were really necessary. The higher level skills, needing to know the arithmetic, needing to know, grammar, even needing how to write essays, because most people are not going to be writers, but most people are going to need to be able to write something every once in a while and make it sound cogent. Except now you can put a prompt into AI, and like I did today with the leave a glowing review, boom. I did the actual outline for the video I made a little while ago about the various dice mechanics and choosing a dice mechanic for your game. I'll tell you what I did. I took all the transcripts from a bunch of the dice videos I did. So copy the transcripts, put them into ChatGPT, said, made a couple clarifying statements, say, hey, can you put this in some kind of outline that makes sense? So the chronological order of these videos doesn't really matter, but something that flows a little better. And what I wanted to do essentially was have it do the research on the things I said to give me an outline. And it spit out an outline, and I made a couple corrections, say, could you work with this data as well? Boom. And so it did that for me I know, I get canceled. But it did that for me. It took me probably, the cutting and pasting took the longest time. So it probably took me, 5 minutes, of which, to actually do all that, and most of it was just cutting and pasting, putting the AI, asking the questions, reading it over. Okay, this looks good enough for an outline that I can use. And I even had to expand this, and it was interesting to see what else it wrote. Not all of which was accurate, not all of which I agreed with. Whether it was accurate is up to interpretation, depending upon your biases and preferences and why you play role-playing games. But had I instead watched those videos, or even like copied and pasted the transcripts into like a document and read them and made the outline, it probably would have taken me a couple hours to get with something that I was happy with. And this did it like that. It's a tool just like anything else. But things are changing really, really fast. And so there's a bunch of skills. Do I still like writing? Absolutely. Would I want it to write for me for real? No. But like, give me an outline? Sure. Or, hey, I'm sick of, I think I said I could say this one part better. Any other suggestions? Boom. And it's done that for me with video titles and some other stuff. It's, it's pretty interesting. Everyone, it spits out crap every once in a while, but most of the time it spits out something you need to just kind of mess with. Things are changing so fast, which I think, honestly, is a good thing, because it gives us more time. It's like being a Greek, like being an ancient Greek. We're having a lot of these things that we used to have to do that can now all of a sudden be done by something else. And I don't mean that we're going to be helpless. Go read the book Forgetfulness, or the short story Forgetfulness. Great short story, sci-fi story, a classic. And a lot of that, a lot of what I'm saying, you may like. It may, just read it, because you might resonate with it a little bit, or it might make a little bit of sense. But there's so many creative things we can do as human beings, and we get bogged down by the minutia. Or there's all these other things that we need to do. But now, like the ancient Greeks, we can have a lot of that lifted off of us if we use some of the tools that are available to us now intelligently. And we can spend more of our time doing the creative part and the thinking part, and being paid to think, or at least enjoy thinking and coming up with novel things, and less of the mundane research grunt work. I mean, even just for probabilities, there were some things that any dice couldn't do, and I was able to put in some scenarios to things like ChatGPT, and I have to try some of the other AIs for this. And they don't just spit out an answer. They give you like, well, this is the math I use, and step by step, and here's your answer. It's like, huzzah, because I've done some other hard work and done other formulas and what have you, and hey, listen, I'm not a mathematician. That's not going to be my life. If I was a mathematician and that was my career, then I would certainly, be all about it. Mathematics is fascinating to me, but to an extent. It's not what makes me jump up and down. There's things about it that are fascinating, but it's a tool to get to this other place. And if I can have a tool, use the tool, a lot of tools, have a bigger toolbox. What does have to do with the truth? Authenticity? Well, I think it helps at least helps me become more of my authentic self because I'm not majoring or I'm not spending so much time on the things which I just freaking hate or that are just boring and drudgery work. Yes, I absolutely like to understand how things work, and I've had some great times. I don't know if can you get Microsoft Access anymore? Did they just do away with that entirely? I love that relational database, but writing SQL, figuring all that stuff out, that's great stuff. And I, enjoyed a lot of the videos I made years ago, looking into like things like RPG mechanics. But now, you know, that's fun. But now I can just plug that stuff in and not have to worry about it. Cool stuff. Ditto for doing like research on like music equipment or any kind of other subject. The research part is the part that can be really time consuming. And yes, do you need to check your research? Absolutely. I'm not saying you absolutely trust it anymore. Do you absolutely trust anything you hear on the internet? However, even with like some of the deeper seeker, there's DeepSeek I think is more of a company, but there's a way like with more advanced AI, or you can buy a more advanced version of it, or use it through somebody else's service to really do some deep research and get some cool stuff out of that, which would take you and I days or weeks. And so you check it, and then you can do the real thing we showed up for in the first place. That to me is really cool. So I think despite all the issues, we're in a kind of a cool era. But whether you like it or not, man, I think of what's happened in my lifetime. And no, I'm not just talking about, oh, we used to have 8 tracks and then we had record players and all that stuff. That's certainly true. And we certainly did have black and white TVs were more ubiquitous than color TVs when I was a kid. And I remember having a ProScan TV and thinking that was really cool. And then the flat screens came out, and then the plasmas and all this, the stuff. But it's not just that. Think of just like cellular phones too. I remember the first one I got was like kind of a flip, and then I remember like I had that really cool Nokia. It was like probably like $90 or something like that. This really small phone. And if you ever had carpenter jeans, there was this little pocket in the carpenter jeans on the side, like especially Levi's, and those Nokia phones could fit right in there. And at the time, the smaller the better. And so it was always like whoever had the coolest, smallest phone, and you could play like Snake on that. You remember that Snake game? And there might have been a bowling game too. But who cares about the games? We just got a small cell phone and the T9 predictive text, and that was cool. Except you couldn't wish somebody happy Valentine's Day. You wish somebody happy Takeaways Day. And then what's happened with phones, like in the last, every few years you look back and say, my God, it's like so different. It's so different. The way the internet has changed is radically different. The way like YouTube has changed is radically different. I got on board in YouTube in 2011. I think I actually started a channel which I put like 1 or 2 videos on that were about like things my daughters like videos my daughters made in 2009. I can't recall when YouTube really became a thing, but I got on pretty early, and missed the RPG Brigade thing, but I was making videos at the same time before I vanished for a while. But as in the 14 years that I've been involved with YouTube, it has changed dramatically. TikTok, the whole 9 years, but things are not only is the electronic age, all the information age type stuff changing dramatically, but everything else around it is changing as well. I remember, once again, in the 80s, listening to this guy talk, and he was talking about this idea he saw, maybe it was at Disney or something, but he saw talking about this idea that the housewife of the future, because it was still, but at the of the future, will be able to have a computer. Everybody's going to have a computer in their home. Like, really? Maybe. And they're going to be able to order products and have these products delivered to them. And thinking, man, that would take an awful lot. I don't know, maybe really rich people. Really? And here we are, man. And just how much the world has changed. And so whether this makes you mad or not, you have to be flexible enough to adapt with it, because if you don't, I believe you're going to get crushed at some point. There are some jobs and some careers that will probably be safe no matter what, but even how they do business is radically changed. And I got to talk, I saw like how much, my physician, how things have changed for them in terms of the information they get and how they conduct patient interviews and what have you, and how that stuff is held in the database, which is great, by the way, because I remember actually working for the state, and going into the archives, just reading Dell's comment there into the archives about somebody's medication history, which was on 2-hole punch, not 3-hole punch, but 2-hole punch files, and big folders, and I had to go through folders and folders and folders and write down and then type out a document listing this person's medication history because nobody remembered it, and the guy wasn't that old. He was like maybe 30 at the time, and he'd been on several different medication trials. So I was able to present this to the physician, as we were considering new medications. That's the past. How all this stuff is available. I'm not sure what they're going to do for the chip industry and the mission industry and the tortilla industry, Dell. We'll see. But so much of that is changing everything, and so being flexible is really important. But I think it's also this great golden era because there are so many ways you can do things digitally, business-wise. I mean, there are people on YouTube making good livings. I don't want to be a millionaire, but there are people on YouTube that literally make good enough livings with their channel and with product affiliations. I would do some of that with products I believed in, absolutely. Or with sponsorships, or with even if they develop a product of their own, whether it's some kind of digital product or courses or whatever, or where it happens to be. You can build an audience on social media, and you could do it and be a real jerk, or you can do it and just be authentic. And still, so maybe you'll get less people if you're authentic. It doesn't really matter. I think I'd be able to sleep at night better. But so it's closed some doors, but it's opened a lot of other doors as well. So I think being open to that truth, rather than hiding your head in the sand like a as my friend would say, a flamingo. It's an ostrich, and they don't do it either. Just hiding your head in the sand and wishing it'll go away. It's not the way to go about it. But looking at it and saying, hey, what can I do with this? How can I hate to use the term leverage, but how can I take advantage of the way things really are right now? Because that's one of the things that, it was a big part of recovery for me. It is a big part of recovery is, making friends with reality, the way things really are. When you accept that you are powerless over your addiction, if you're in recovery from addiction, like and speak, what you're really accepting is reality. Like, I can't use drugs or alcohol safely. You're making friends with reality. You stop lying and saying there's some way that I can do this safely. And I can't make myself not an addict. That's all. You're just making friends with reality. After that, there's a bunch of work you can do, but it's just stopping pretending that that's not the case. And very often as human beings, we run into so much trouble when we fight reality. When we fight the truth, whatever the truth might be. Stop fighting the truth, you can start to live authentically, because you can start to, do what you really care about, and stop acting upon and reacting to and interacting with an environment that's not really there because you've made it up. You know what I mean? Anyhow, these are just some of my thoughts as I'm sitting around waiting for Susan to come back, and I blathered for way too long. Thanks so much for watching, and all that good stuff. So cheers, until next time.